We're here today on the outskirts of London to look at arguably one of Britain's most iconic architectural homes.
Built with mathematical precision and guided by a lifetime of ideas, Skywood House is a case study in legibility, proportion and restraint. Joining me is Graham Phillips, who reflects on his early influences, his search for form, and how this house became a physical realization of the ideas first explored in a student essay many decades earlier.
I'm here at Skywood to meet its architect, Graham Phillips. Let's go in. So here we are, we're through the gates, and clearly Graham has thought extensively about the approach to this iconic house. Every corner is met with a lot of consideration for the overall design of the house. As we come around the corner, the main view opens up. It's almost like Capability Brown has been here. It's a flooded parkland. It's got reflection. So as we come round the next corner, we almost turn our backs on the house. It gives the impression that you're on a very large site. We go through an avenue of trees and we're back almost where we started, but it gives you this sense of grandeur. This design is something which Capability Brown achieved in his own more classical English landscape, but it's almost a new interpretation of that. Graham, great to see you.
Pleasure to meet you, James. Lovely. Do come in. The design of Skywood can really be summarised quite simply that it's two glass boxes with four very long walls, and the walls extend into the landscape.
And just whilst we're here, Graham, I'm struck you've got this incredible access through the house.
The site isn't square, it's like a diamond shape,
Yes.
like a kite.
Uh-huh.
And the house has been put on the long axis of the diagonal. So in effect, it makes the site much longer and feels
very
more spacious. Just as by joining this together, makes a huge, like 30-metre corridor, which you not normally have. It's an incredibly small house.
Yes.
Because of the planning restrictions.
Yeah. You chose a certain tile size, a grid size.
Everything, walls, you can see there, everything is on a joint.
Sure.
And it's not just it's 600 to the centre of the joint. So the tiles had to be cut at 598 centimetres and so on. And I really got that from Mies van der Rohe.
Right.
As a student, when I studied, the perfection he went into with his detailing, and the God is in the details, that gave me almost the driving force to try and geometrically make it perfect. It took years.
One of the things that's fascinated me about this house, and I've drawn quite a lot of inspiration from my own career, is the column, its location, it's inside, it's not outside, it's red. There must be a very strong reason why you've got that column designed in the way you have.
But it was quite strange. It's inside for corrosion reasons.
Right.
Initially, the column was white. When the house was finished, it was painted white. And I remember it was one of the things Norman Foster often commented on projects. He never liked it when roofs looked like they were sitting on glass walls, even though they were held up by columns, because it looked like they'd crush the glass.
Right.
And when the house was finished, when you stood outside, when this column was white, you couldn't see it maybe because the room was white.
Okay.
So yet again, it looked like the roof sat on the glass.
Right.
So then we tried all sorts of colours, bright yellow, blues, everything. And in the end, it was only this, I'm going to call it fire engine red, was a colour that when you look from outside, you could see in daylight, you could still see the column, and it was holding up the roof.
Yeah. So I guess you're using as an architect the colour to try and describe the building. It's being honest, and you're celebrating it.
Yes, exactly. And now we're going to move into the long corridor, which is really the bedroom wing, that has a roof light, so the whole corridor is daylit. And there are basically four almost identical bedrooms. And if we go into this room, well, this was the typical room for each of the children, where they had their bed, they had bookcases where they could display toys or whatever they wanted, they had a TV, space for computers, and they each had their own small ensuite bathroom.
And Graham, at night time, obviously this corridor is not filled with natural light, it goes to artificial light.
But then there's concealed lighting.
And that just washes down here as well.
Yeah. So this is the master bedroom, which is the end of the second glass box.
We have a portrait painting here.
Yes, that sometimes every square inch of the walls are filled with our daughter Jackie's art.
Right.
But normally there are none, because we think the landscape is the art. But this, we've got a shoot next week for the BBC series, and they specifically wanted one of Jackie's paintings, which we brought in for the film shoot.
Yeah. Graham, thanks very much for sharing us around and talking more about the design and legacy of this house. Perhaps we could go and have a more detailed discussion.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for allowing us to come and visit you here at Skywood and talk to you. Can you just tell us who you are and a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah. I'm Graham Phillips. I'm an architect. I worked most of my life with Norman Foster. I retired from them back in 2008.
Before we get into more discussion about the house, I think we should let it be known that our time at Foster & Partners overlapped in 2004. You were chief executive and I was a junior architect. I seem to recall as chief executive, you sat literally opposite Norman, only a couple of feet away from the famous round table at Riverside Studios.
Opposite him.
And I suppose as a result, you had your eyes and ears on much of what was going on in the office at that time.
When I was at university and I finished, the only company I wanted to work for was Norman Foster.
Right.
And I applied, I went for an interview and I didn't get the job. And I went down the road to also a great practice called Arup Associates.
Okay.
And I was with Arups for 3 years, which was wonderful. And when I was with Arups, I worked on the headquarters for IBM, the computer people in Portsmouth. And in fact, several years later, Norman won his first IBM project. And he actually headhunted me. And I jumped at the opportunity to work for Norman. And I got my job then on this IBM project.
And I understand it was a bit of a learning curve having gone from Arups and
it was such a shock, because the wonderful thing about Arups was it was like being at university. They had design manuals for everything, that they had a research department for all the microns thickness of paint, for British standard curbs, everything. And one of the things I'd done in Arups, I'd done what was called an external works package, where you design roads, pavements, curbs, all of that. And when I joined Foster's, I was given the external works package for this new IBM project. And I just got on and did all the drawings. And I had my first pin-up with Norman Foster on the back of the magnetic wall at the office. And he came looking. And he said, "What's all this?" And I said, "Oh, this is how it all needed to be. It's what I've learned." He says, "Let me tell you, Graham," he says, "from now on, just forget everything you ever learned from Arups. It's a clean slate. We're starting again." He says, "My vision of this external package and the roads and the pavement," he said, "think of a country house where there are no curbs. It's just gravel meeting the grass. Total different approach." So that was the shock to my system, my first couple of weeks in Foster's, where we ripped up the drawings. Arups was like a research institute. Foster's was totally different.
Right.
And everything was up for grabs. Everything was questioned. And that's what I learned over my 35 years here, was really to question everything.
Graham, can you tell us a little about your journey into architecture, how you got into it?
When I was at school, all I wanted to do was become a painter and be an artist. And in fact, I actually managed to get a position in the School of Art, Maidstone School of Art, at the age of 15. And I wasn't going to be allowed to go there till I passed 16. And because I was going to do A-levels, they all said to me, "We know you want to do art, but because you're able to do your A-levels, why don't you choose to apply to university to do architecture? Because we believe there's a lot of drawing in it."
Right.
So on those UCAS forms, I put down architecture, but I was hoping I wouldn't get in and I'd go to my art school. But in fact, I did. I got my A-levels and I went to Liverpool University.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll go on from there. Liverpool University, or Liverpool School of Architecture, as it was known, was a very informative time in your career. Perhaps what you learned at Liverpool stayed with you for your entire career, which is really fascinating. And I understand at that time you wrote an essay called "The Search for Form." And perhaps some of the things in that essay have been realised in this house here today. And maybe you could tell us a bit more about that essay.
At Liverpool, I would think there were about 3 tutors, professors, who had a great influence on me.
Right.
One of them was Malcolm Quantrill.
Okay.
But then actually the most influential tutor was a man called Brock, David Brock.
Okay.
He was passionate about form. He always talked about form, which I didn't really understand when he was talking about form. He always referred to form and aspects of form. And when it came to my dissertation, and he was my tutor for it, I embarked on this search for form to really understand what that meant for architecture. And to take you back, in that era in the 60s, particularly at Portsmouth School of Architecture, they were trying to develop analytical theories which were like to tell you how to design, like in a more mechanistic way. It was all starting to be developed. And I decided that for my dissertation, I wanted to try and find out what makes good design, what is architecture, what is it all about? And it was a search which was like a needle in a haystack, and I think I read 400 books for it.
Right.
And I read everything on microbiology, psychology, perception, the DNA structure. In the end, coming to the complete conclusion, I found there was no formula thing. And in the dissertation, my conclusion was the most important thing is the creative leap.
Right.
The creative leap off the end of the pencil.
Yeah.
And what you do as an architect, you study all the parameters, all the brief, the site, everything. You take in as much information as you can. But at the end of the day, there's a point where you get that creative response, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
And there's no formula that you can apply. In the end of the day, the brain assimilates it all, and then you make that creative jump.
Yeah.
So that was one. The other one was that the other thing, and I termed it in the dissertation, legibility.
Okay.
That in architecture, for what, as an observer, you're looking at or living in, your perception of it, how legible it is. Does it look like a bank? Does it look like a cube or a wall or a floating plane? That was the quality of architecture that really mattered, its legibility. And what was interesting was at the time I wrote all about it, and I think I thought I understood it. But not until I was designing this house and working with my wife Diane did I really realize that I hadn't really understood it until I was physically doing it. Because what happened was, whether it was at university or later, I was pretty hopeless at physical model making. I always got the glue everywhere, or what have you. And in the end, I'd come up with the concept of this house of the 2 glass boxes and the long walls extending into the landscape in a very Miesian pinwheel wall. And what I found was the models I built were horrible. And I solved that by having plastic blocks made in perspex, exactly the right size of these rooms, and then just double-siding taping the roof and the long walls, which made an absolutely immaculate model, almost perfect. And it was really, my wife Diane looked at it and she said, I don't know what's the trouble with you architects is, you all make wonderful white models as our white cardboard models, but when the buildings get built, they never look like those simple white models. They all became so complicated and often quite ugly.
Yeah.
And I really thought a lot about that. And in a way, and I can show you pictures of those simple models, a lot of the journey doing this house was to actually try and build it technically to look as simple as those basic models. And it was very, very hard to achieve, but that was my ambition.
I'm just interested when you talk about legibility. Obviously, postmodern didn't really come into your repertoire in the sense that, the hot dog stand in America was shaped like a hot dog stand. I mean, to a certain extent, that's legible, but it's sort of fake and all the rest of it. Where were you at the time when all that postmodern stuff was going on, and how did you...
I was still set in my Miesian dream, really, and I've never changed.
Right.
I think Mies was the finest architect of all time.
That's fantastic. So I'd like to just talk about the the other inspirations that you had and influences, not just architects, but maybe nature, art, anything along those lines outside of maybe Mies and stuff like that?
I think one of the, let's say, my wife and I, we lived in Hong Kong, doing the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank. And one of the most influential places we traveled to were the gardens in Kyoto.
Right.
Those wonderful Japanese gardens that had tea houses and pavilions. And I think what we really learnt there was that if you've got a site that you're going to build a house on, the total design of the whole surface of the site and its landscape and the house should be considered as one composition, one entity, not I'm going to design a house and then decide how to landscape the garden.
Yeah.
And that really came from what we experienced in Kyoto.
Right.
And maybe in a way, I think we mentioned it might be a bit like the influence of Capability Brown and others, but for us it came from the gardens in Kyoto.
I mean, as I look out, for me, arguably, the influence of the classical English landscape is very apparent. You know, places like Chatsworth and Blenheim with the traditional Capability Brown cart path and you know, leading around the driveway. That's very apparent here.
And we very deliberately put the entrance at the opposite corner and created a drive that's actually a journey that's a spiral.
Right.
And the spiral structures, you know, to do with Fibonacci and proportion, and the DNA molecule is a spiral. And that's what my professor David Brock always used to talk about, spiral movement and the pleasure of it. So we put the gate on the other side and this spiral drive through to the entrance. Yeah. But also deliberately creating trees and bushes that so when you came through the gate, you couldn't see the house. But then you turn the first corner, which makes you pause, and you get the view across the island to the front of the house. And then you carry on, you can't see the house again, you go into the woodland. And all of that we created and we laid it out as part of a total composition.
Yes. I'd like to ask you a little bit more about the name of the house. How did the name Skywood come about?
Well, you might be able to hear it now, there's a helicopter.
Right.
And this is ancient woodland where all the trees have preservation orders. And there's a little airport, airfield, where you get the planes and helicopters. And it seemed that Skywood, or looking skyward, seemed a really suitable name.
That's great. Okay, well, Graham, we'd like to move on to more about the design of the house. Could you talk a little bit about who the house was for?
This was going to have to be a family house with 3 children, a whole family and lots of pets and all of that. That had to be part of the brief. And the children were all quite young at the time, but they were very clear that, you know, because they'd had to share rooms when they were younger and so on, they all wanted their own bedroom, they wanted their own bathroom, TV. And because we were very restricted in area because of the planning restrictions, it meant the bedrooms and the bathrooms had to all be very small, but at least they had everything. And in a funny way, the way that the planning restrictions made the house very compact was good in the end, because without that, I'd have probably built a house twice as big, which would probably been far too expensive and maybe not as elegant in the end.
One point that always fascinates architects is the connection between outside and inside, and dematerializing the relationship between outside and inside. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, because I think what's interesting here is, and it's something that Malcolm Quantrill wrote about when he was writing about it in one of his books, that there are actually no like windows in this house in a conventional sense. They are just frameless glass walls with no windows that go from floor to ceiling. And the wonderful thing, particularly at night, the glass does disappear.
Yes, yeah.
And a bit like the Kyoto and integrating the house with the landscape, the long walls that extend into the landscape almost create rooms.
They pull
where the garden is part of the house. And if the glass wall is very transparent without frames and sliding doors, it literally feels you're sitting in the outside space, which is wonderful.
So, Graham, the house has attracted a lot of media attention over the years. It's featured in Hollywood movies, videos, and ad campaigns. I think for me, one of the most famous ones was the Thierry Henry advert where he filmed for Renault. It was known as the Va Va Voom advert, yeah, which arguably was a celebration of minimalism and je ne sais quoi. Do you think there was a reason why Renault chose this house?
I suppose
Did it tell
at the time
story?
the house, well, it still is. It's very unique, very unusual, and I think it really, it set a scene,
Yeah,
which was, which many films and adverts and people have come here since who find it.
Yeah.
It works well for them. I think what was interesting is all those years later, Stormzy came.
Yes.
And what was so different, because when they came, I've said I was never a fan of a rapper of any sort, but in fact the song he did was a love song and a ballad.
Yeah.
And that video taken of him inside, they took all the furniture out and just put him in one chair, and all the reflections of the water. I think it's almost like a work of art.
Yes.
That music video, which is quite exceptional, I think.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
And I think maybe I've got some of the lyrics here. He spoke about my miracle, my happy place, my heart and soul. I just wonder whether the architecture struck a chord with Stormzy personally.
I hope it did. Not long after the house was finished, it was great that Norman Foster came and visited with his wife Elena, and they were sitting there with us. And I don't know if it was his wife Elena or my wife said to Norman, "Well, what do you think of it, Norman?" And he took quite a long time before he answered, and he said, "Well, in one word, I think it's spiritual."
Yes.
Which I thought that was wonderful.
Yeah.
And he said, "It's just so uplifting."
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like it's a sanctuary, perhaps. And it takes you away from the madness of the world outside us. And maybe that strikes a chord as well. Graham, as we've been around this house today, we've noticed some very interesting pieces of art. We see it in the landscape, we see it on the floor and on the walls. Maybe you could just talk about this house's relationship between the art and the architecture.
Yeah, certainly. That in a way, we tend to have very, very little art, and in a way, don't find it's particularly necessary. That the concept of the very plain, pure, uncluttered space, the space that creates serenity and upliftingness, that with the landscape that's out through that window there or on each side of the house, in a way, that is enough contrast to the house. The art is the landscape and what one sees. You don't have to cover all the walls with paintings and so on.
Yeah.
But interestingly, we love objects, and we actually prefer to have them outside. If you move around, you see, particularly Diane's got lots of objects and things as part of the landscape, and they're not particularly in the house. We have a few things, and they tend to move around a lot.
Yeah.
And there's been times where every inch of these walls has been filled with paintings of my daughter or my son James's photographs, and then other times they're all gone. It's sort of totally a movable feast.
Yeah, yeah. And your two sons went into the architecture profession, and your daughter is a portrait painter.
Yeah.
Could you talk a bit more about their career?
Yes,
and
because
what
was interesting, Daniel, who was the eldest boy, he was totally in love with computer games, and he actually decided he wanted to be a computer games designer.
Right.
And he managed to go to university, and he did a degree in computer game design.
Right.
And he got a job with Electronic Arts, designing some of the big games like Harry Potter and so on. And when you're in the computer games industry, you tend to specialize either in what's called the gaming environment, which is like the background and all the buildings, or you're an animation expert who does all the little characters and how they move. And Daniel became the one who designed the environment.
Yes.
And he did that for several years. And I don't know if it's because he'd lived here and the architecture and him growing up here, he decided he wanted to design real environments and not the fantasy ones he
Right.
was doing in the
Yeah.
computer gaming industry. So he packed it in, and it's a long 5-year course. He started again and became a qualified architect.
And you have a daughter you mentioned who's a painter.
Yeah.
And she's painted for some of the Hollywood actors and directors, has
Yeah,
she not?
when they know they're coming, she does pictures
Yeah,
of them,
yeah.
or of
Yeah.
James Bond or something or other. Yeah.
And Graham, you've mentioned the sadness surrounding your late son and his career that he was embarking on. Maybe you could just talk a bit about...
He was the middle boy who also became
middle
an
boy,
architect.
right.
What was very interesting is that after he did his degrees, he decided to do an MA,
Right.
which was going to take him another couple of years. And he chose the subject of public space in different cultures.
Right.
And he called his MA Common Ground. And he embarked on a journey literally around the entire world, including South America, Asia, Australia, and he went everywhere. And he photographed and he drew public spaces in all those different cultures.
Sure.
And wrote about them. And that's how he got his MA. And when he returned, he had some 8,000 photographs of that trip.
Right.
So after his passing, we set up a foundation, the
Right.
James Phillips Foundation.
Yes.
And there's a website one can
Right.
find
Which will
with that. And
post
has
on
some
our
of his images.
relevant links.
And then we had a wonderful exhibition year of
Right.
all his photographs and
Yeah.
his travels. No, what I think was unusual, or what have you, is that James was a very sporty young man, and he died running a marathon. And he was running the marathon raising money for charity.
Yes. And what charity was he raising money for? Do you
It
remember?
was actually for another young man who died at a similar age to him a few
Right.
years before, and various friends had got involved
Right.
to raise money for him. And he didn't actually die of a heart attack. He had this thing where it's like an electrical failure.
Right.
So there was nothing wrong with him or his heart. So
Yeah.
no real tests would have found it. But
Right.
it was just like an electrical failure brought on by extreme exertion, which
Right.
is why it happens. I think it happens often to footballers
Right.
or people running marathons. If you've got that defect, which is the electrical defect, that can make it happen.
And the aim of that foundation is to, I think you mentioned there's
Yes.
some charitable
Yeah,
prizes
because
and
what
such like.
James, he loved travel and photography, and the foundation sponsors travel prizes, and we did that at Westminster University and in the company he worked for, which was Make Architects, which actually where Daniel works
Right.
now.
Okay.
So there were annual travel prizes.
Right. And that's still going
James
on.
Phillips Travel Prize. Yeah.
Great.
And when we built that sculpture on the roundabout near Amersham, one of the prototype birds we actually have on the island there,
Yes.
which we light at night.
Right. I think, Graham, one of the words that surrounds mass housing today is crisis. Many of the world is suffering from lack of homes and good quality homes. Is there anything that you have come across in this house that you wish or you think could be incorporated into social housing or mass market homes? Maybe the play of light or connection to nature. Is there anything that strikes you that could be included into other homes?
What I would say is, whether it's about mass housing or any other housing, just like we talked earlier about the care and attention that architects need to put into the detail and how things are made, and it should all be made as beautiful as possible,
Yes.
whether it's mass or a custom house.
Yeah.
And what we did here by necessity, because we were limited on floor area,
Yeah.
we made everything multi-purpose as possible.
Yes.
So things could be moved.
Yes.
Things could have a
Flexibility.
flexibility,
Right.
a double purpose. And I think that sort of flexibility and multi-use, and just taking great care in how places are lit and designed.
Craftsmanship doesn't necessarily cost more money. It just
No, it
takes
doesn't. Yeah.
more
Yeah.
thought.
And it's not about expensive materials, it's just about the care of the detailing. Yeah.
Yeah. Graham, if we could speak hypothetically for a moment, if you were suddenly not able to return to Skywood for whatever reason, what would you treasure most about the house?
If you read about Zen Buddhism, that one of the phrases of Zen Buddhism is the most wonderful thing is to be thingless.
Right.
Which in a way is a bit, I think, why minimalism and the lack of stuff and objects, is considered to be sort of spiritual. And in that sense, I don't think there's any particular thing or object I would treasure other than our animals.
Right. Interesting.
And they've come and gone. I think there's one coming in now. There's our cat,
Right.
Woody, who was born in one of the trees.
Oh, fantastic.
He'd
Great.
have to be rescued.
Yes. Fantastic. Graham, your inspiration from this house has stemmed from Japanese gardens in Kyoto, Nice, Louis Barragan, and potentially Tado Ando. If they were to visit the house here today, what would they most enjoy about the property?
I think mainly the one I'd be most concerned about would be Mies. And I think because what I discovered about his work was the perfection and the attention to detail, even though the end result was very simple and pure, the effort he put in to make it perfect. And I think that's why he had the phrase is less is more and God is in the detail. I hope when he'd see what I've done to do with the modules, the proportions, the technology, that he'd
would grab him.
He'd like that.
Yeah. Graham, as we reach the end of our chat, I'd just like to float the idea that every architect, designer has some sort of legacy, good, bad, or indifferent. And I've been thinking about this house, and I think it's kind of hard to separate the architect Graham Phillips from Skywood, the house. And as we think forward for the generations to come, how do you think the legacy of Skywood will meet the legacy of Graham Phillips, the architect? And are they separable?
Ever since Skywood's been built, almost every year, I'm contacted by students from around the world, whether it was themselves or through a professor. It's every year is chosen as a sort of case study.
Right.
And I don't, because the book on Skywood is available. Unlike most architectural books that tend to be a description and a book of photographs.
Yeah.
The book on Skywood describes every single step of the journey,
Right.
and all the iterations of the process and the proportions and the analysis, all the technical issues, the things that work, and more importantly, I think it shows the effort that was put in. And I hope the legacy will be for young students and architects that they really have to persevere to try and achieve the best.
And for the time being, for the people that want to learn more about you and what you're doing, you have the website for the house, Skywood.
Yes, skywoodhouse.com.
And then there's the website link for the foundation,
The James Phillips Foundation.
James Phillips Foundation.
And my daughter has a website for her art, which is Jackie Phillips Artist. And there's all sorts of books, as you've said, including, sadly, the Skywood book is out of print. And I'm trying to persuade Thames and Hudson to reprint it. And I'm not sure whether one can acquire it digitally, which one should be able to, but I don't know if one can.
And that will all be in the show notes. Graham, I want to take this moment to thank you very much for allowing us into your house and to talk to you more about your career and your interests. Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Next time on An Architect's Perspective, I'm visiting the Storhamar Barn, Sphere Fenn's landmark of quiet modernism in Norway. Built on top of the ruins of a medieval barn, Fenn's design weaves concrete, timber, and glass into the historic structure, creating a dialogue between the past and the present. I toured the building with Professor Per Olav, a close collaborator of Sphere Fenn and a key voice in preserving his architectural legacy. The full video will be on YouTube if you'd like to watch, or if you prefer to listen, just search for An Architect's Perspective wherever you get your podcasts.